So, what happens to a founder's brain when they realize that the business they build with a lot of effort, a lot of time, it can be sold in little pieces or by a very cheap price that is not fair to all the effort they put behind? And then you get in the middle some fear, even the ego of the business owner, potentially loss of identity after so many years of working in that business. It can kill also potential deals with buyers if they are trying to sell their business. But what if there was a way to negotiate in a completely different way and exit that business? One that instead of cutting the pie, it actually makes it bigger. It adds a different alternative to sell a business. Today we are moving beyond just media and true educational masterclass, I would say. We are sitting down here with Illa Burbank. She's the executive director of the North Carolina Employee Ownership Center. And we're going to be uncovering the mechanics, the neuroscience, and negotiation strategies behind ultimate business legacy, which is called employee ownership. Illa, welcome to Towel Podcast. How's everything going for you?
Very well. We recently launched a initiative with the city of Raleigh, and so we're seeing a lot of uptick in business owner interest as more and more people are learning about this option for themselves.
Even learning about this.
Just learning about it.
It was news to me, and it's very exciting. But let's get right into how would you define first. Let's start with what is an NCEOC?
Sure. That's a much easier way of saying the North Carolina Employee Ownership Center. It's a big, long mouthful, so we call it NCEOC. We are a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, and we're funded by grants and donations. And everything that we do is at no cost to business owners, all our education and meeting with the business owners, because we believe in the power of employee ownership. Our mission is to expand the number of employee-owned businesses in North Carolina.
Employee ownership sounds a little bit like a co-op to me, but it's not like that, right? It's not a cooperative.
So the employee ownership has three options. One of them is employee stock ownership plan, or ESOP. Then there is a worker cooperative. Now, we can get into that later or now, but that's not the electric cooperative some people may be familiar with. And it is not when you go to locally, the Weaver Street, and you have the benefit of shopping at a cooperative grocery store. This is a worker cooperative, a little bit different form. And then there's this newer model called the Employee Ownership Trust, or EOT. So those are the three main types of employee ownership options. Each one is different. Each one has its nuances for different size businesses and has will achieve different goals for the different business owners.
Yeah. And I think it's worth to explore these three options. But before we get into that, why would someone, specifically a business owner, consider this instead of selling the business?
One of the great things about my job recently has been when I talk to these business owners, and I'm thinking of one business owner in particular, Southern North Carolina will say, and it sticks with me because this person said that I've known some of these employees since I was 10 years old. When I sell this business, I'm going to see these employees and I'm going to be in my community. I want to make sure that my employees and my community are okay, that his legacy continues and the business that he built took so long and hard to build, that it will continue.
Yeah. So there's an emotional aspect there too.
Very, very emotional aspect. For certain. You have several options. If you have children, right, you might be able to pass on this legacy to your children. But more and more kids want to go their own way and they're not taking over the businesses. Or you might not have children to pass them on to. And in fact, there's a recent business owner who is having health problems and does not have any children to pass them on to. So the employees are his kids.
Yeah.
So he's trying to find a way to pass that business on to the employees, his kids, essentially. Others might go out and try to find a strategic buyer, and that's just going out into the wide world and saying, hey, who wants to buy my business? And you don't know who you're going to get. Brokers, others might list with a broker, and statistics show that only 20% of the businesses overall that are listed with a broker actually end up selling.
Oh.
So can you imagine making that decision as a business owner and just saying, okay, I'm ready to sell, and then only having that 20% chance that they'll find a buyer for you.
I can just imagine what's going on through a business owner's mind. Would they have to make this decision, sell the business, give it away, or just like shut it down? I think it's really tough.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you're right. If we just listed some of these options of, family member selling it to outside people, if they can't find that, and this is especially more impactful in rural communities, right? If they don't know about employee ownership, they think about their other options that they know about, and none of those work out, they shut down. And it happens far too often. And in a rural community, you have just one business that shuts down. Imagine it has a greater impact in those smaller communities.
I think, and correct me if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, but to me, it's on the interest of everybody, the state, the local economy, the consumers, to keep the business operating. Shutting down a business, to me, I think it has a lot of negative impact for the community.
Yes, businesses are often that stable part of the community. Without those businesses, you don't have that infrastructure. You don't, where do you go to shop? Where do you go? Everyone is now having to leave that community to take care of business. So you need those businesses to stay within that community. But also it keeps that wealth rooted within that community. They're not going elsewhere to spend their dollars. They're spending their dollars within their own community.
Yeah. It's like we were talking a little bit on this mini economy that I was describing a little bit earlier before we started recording the podcast. But I think keeping local economies alive in this economy is essential.
Very much so.
Now, let's start getting a little bit into some of these details, right? So there are different, there are three main categories, right, for employee ownership.
Correct.
What are these three? And can you describe each one?
Each one separately. Mm-hmm. Yep. So I think the one that people are most familiar with is that employee stock ownership plan, or the ESOP. Mm-hmm. So that there's over 6,600 ESOPs in the United States. It's been around for decades. However, this option tends to be for businesses that are slightly larger. We'll just say very generically 30 or more employees. To describe it very quickly, a trust is formed. Just like a family can create a trust, and they have that trust where it's for the benefit of the children. But instead of having for the benefit of the children, they set up this trust, which is the benefit of the employees. So this trust buys the shares of that owner who's built this business and is ready to exit, so that now this trust owns the shares of the business. So the ownership is this business continues on. You don't have to worry about selling it to someone who 5 years from now is going to exit. Where are they going to sell it? Yeah. So now you have that long-term ownership structure for this business, and it is a retirement asset. So think of a 401k, a retirement asset for the employees. Each year, based on some profitability and other factors, the trust allocates shares to the employees. So each year, this employee gets a statement that says, you have X number of shares in your name, and here's the price per share. And you now know you have set aside for you this amount of money. And since it's a retirement vehicle, when that employee retires or after they leave, the company buys back those shares from that employee. And so that employee now has that dollar amount as a retirement fund for themselves.
Yeah.
Now, 4 out of 10 Americans don't have any retirement assets.
4 out of 10.
4 out of 10 have no retirement assets.
Wow. Those are hard numbers to digest. It's a lot. It's almost half of the population. I mean,
yes,
and if half of the population don't have retirement, I mean, I can't only imagine like what happens to everybody else, right? Because one of the aspects I started this kind of podcast discussions, right? Everything started with demography, actually, and when we were looking at this pyramid, and I quote, I make quotation marks, the population pyramid, right? That is changing the shape, right? It's not any longer a pyramid. It's kind of shrinking in the base. Yes. And that's a big concern for economists and a lot of people, right? Because usually younger generations tend to be used to be a lot more than people retiring. We're supporting people retiring. But if you have now that base is shrinking, right? So you have less people in the workforce supporting more people who are retiring. That's a huge problem. Now, if they don't have these retirement assets, it becomes even more problematic.
Yeah, I don't know what the latest is of when they're projecting Social Security to run out of funds, but if you don't have that Social Security and you have no retirement funds,
Yeah.
it's desperate.
What kind of companies can benefit from this vehicle that you were describing?
So again, they're going to be the ones that are slightly larger, 30 or more employees. And the reason that's the case is because it is a retirement vehicle. You're going to have oversight by the Department of Labor and such, just like any other retirement vehicle. There's a lot of oversight there. And so it's a little bit costlier to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
So slightly larger. Now, if you're asking what industries, really almost any industry can benefit with a 30 or more, very generically. Employees, I would say the top ones currently are construction, manufacturing, and professional services. Think about engineering and accounting or architectural firms, those kinds of professional services. That's the top one, but it is very appropriate for nearly every industry.
I see. So this is the ESOPs, right?
Correct.
And what are the other two vehicles that are there?
So the next one we'll talk about is Employee Ownership Trust, or EOT. So that's relatively new to the United States. It's been around in the UK for a very, very long time. It's established there, well known, and only recently is gaining some popularity here in the United States. So I said there are over 6,600 ESOPs. There's only about, we're estimating 70 total in the US. However, one of the nice things about the EOT is that similar to the ESOP, you're creating this trust. This trust is buying out the shares of that departing founder. So now you have that trust is owning the company. It could be in perpetuity. So when the owner is leaving, they can say, you may never, hey trustee, you may never sell this company. Mm-hmm. Or you may only sell this company if the following conditions are met. Certain percentage of the employees vote, or they get certain return each employee. So you define how long this company can exist. But rather than being a retirement vehicle, instead, we'll call it a profit-sharing vehicle. So at the end of the year, whatever's left over after taxes, after maybe buying more equipment, after that, your net profitability is shared amongst the employees. Mm. So it's current profit-sharing income for those employees. And it's because it does not have the oversight for Department of Labor as a retirement vehicle, it's much cheaper. Mm. So you can have this EOTs can be appropriate for those smaller companies.
I see. Smaller companies, are we saying in a number of employees or in revenue that they produce? How is that a small company defined?
Well, we'll see what your demographics of your listeners are, but I'm being very generic in the number of employees. We also talk about EBITDA, or as a form of net profit. So yes, that profitability, which ties into how much cash that company is generating every year. And that's what ties into what we talked about for the ESOP, because they need to generate every year enough cash after everything is said and done to maintain that structure of paying your trustee, of doing an annual valuation, making sure you're doing what you're supposed to for the retirement vehicle. So yes, there are other metrics, but to make it simple, we stick with number of employees.
I'm assuming there's some type of relationship between the number of employees and the numbers in the financial statements for the companies. And
it can be, although, that's why we say very generally, because you could certainly have a 20-person professional services firm that is generating a lot of cash, and they would be appropriate for an ESOP still.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And how are we looking here? So we start with a very complex vehicle, right?
Yes.
And it has a lot of regulation. And then we went to the EOTs. Is the next one easier, or what is the next one?
It is not easier. It is easier in that a worker cooperative, that can be for, if you're being very generous, as few as 3 employees. Mm. It is also the only one that really is currently set up as a startup. So you can be a brand new business owner. Mm-hmm. And you have 2 or 3 other partners who say, I want to start a business. Let's start this business together. And you can start out as an employee-owned company as a worker cooperative. Currently, that doesn't really exist for the other 2 models. So I'm just going to throw that as an extra nugget in there. But the worker cooperative, and you're talking a lot about the emotions of the business owner.
Yeah.
When we talk about the worker cooperative, what happens here is that you set up another whole other company that is going to be run by the employees, right? Now, this is where the business owner hears worker cooperative, and very too often they have this, we say it's not sandals and candles, it's not people sitting around in Birkenstocks talking about socialism, right? So too often business owners just have this preconceived notion about worker cooperatives, and it doesn't get off the ground floor in our discussions. So it's overcoming some of these perceptions. But this new company, then the employees who decide to be an owner in this company will set up all the arrangements ahead of time, the legal documents, what they call the governance documents. So what vote will the employees have? Usually it's you get to vote on the board of directors. Who's going to be on the board of directors? It's usually big picture decisions like, are we going to open up a new facility? If an offer comes in to buy the company, we're going to have the ability to vote as a yay or nay. What we have to dispel to the business owners and to everybody is that it still has a normal business structure. You still have, we'll say, a general manager who supervises employees, and you still have a person who's doing purchasing. You don't have to ask every employee, are we going to buy this brand or that brand? Day-to-day operations are still the same.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing, however, that is more democratically controlled is that any employee who is an owner in this new structure gets one share. One share equals one vote. And it doesn't matter whether you are a supervisor or you're stocking the shelves. You have an equal voice in these big decision making. Now, I do want to say, and in one of these days, maybe we can work together on this. I want to do an episode, we'll call it Mythbusters.
Yeah.
One of them is that the employees have to pay out of pocket. And that's not the case. Oftentimes we're talking to the business owner, why don't you sell it? And I'll do what you did, air quotes, sell it to your employees. They say, well, my employees can't afford to buy this from me. There's no out-of-pocket cost for that transaction. Instead, it's done through loans. So when either the trust or this new company is formed, they are taking out bank loans, or the seller may also take a loan back.
Yeah.
And it's done through loans, this transaction.
So you have a third party kind of giving the cash, like the big bucks, like upfront, and then over time that loan is get paid back.
Correct. Not to get things too confused, but on the worker cooperative, now there's another layer. You've created now this new worker cooperative company, which has been created through loans. Now the employees have a choice to become an owner. You don't have to be. If you just want to come in and do your thing and I don't want to be bothered, you don't have to become an owner. But if you want to have that ownership feeling in this company, you buy a share. If you're a house cleaning company, you may set that limit to be $100 to buy a share. Yeah. If you're an architectural firm, you got to set it to be $12,000, something to set the bar a little bit higher. But that's the only out-of-pocket investment for the employees to become an owner of the worker cooperative.
From an owner point of view, what are the advantages of going through one of these three vehicles instead of just selling the business, apart from the emotional connection, right, of getting away from what they build over time?
It is very often time that emotional connection of their legacy, because we'll bring in my personal experience. I've been part of an employee-owned company, and I've been part of a private equity firm situation.
I see.
So I can talk to you about both sides, right? And I think many business owners know that if they sell that business to out-of-state or to private equity, almost guaranteed that your accounting firm, your accounting group, and your human resources are going to be terminated because they're going to centralize those with their own people.
Yeah.
Right. How long the name on the building is going to last is also up for question. Right. So if you are concerned about your people, your legacy, the culture, you want to make sure that the culture that you built continues. You're going to choose that employee ownership. You're selling it to the people who know it the best.
Yeah.
And understand your values and understand your culture the best, which is your employees.
Yeah. That's I think that's an extremely strong point, right? I would assume a lot of business owners are super committed with the business, right? A successful business requires an owner who was there day and night, super passionate about what they do. and ensuring this legacy stays there, I think is can be achieved by one of these vehicles. And all that you were talking about, which I find fascinating, sounds at the same time a little bit complex, but that's why you guys are there, right? Like you are there. What's your involvement on this process? You guide them, you take them, like, like, let's walk over this path. How do you guys do it?
Certainly. Well, first, I'd say the majority of what we do is that education still, trying to get people to understand that. But to your point of with a business owner, if a business owner says, I think I'm interested in employee ownership, we'll sit down with them one-on-one, because it's important to know what the short-term goals are, their long-term goals. Do they want to sell now? Do they want to stay in the business, or do they want to leave? Why are you doing this? What are your motivations? And then we'll help guide them towards which one of these models makes the most sense, because we'll ask number of employees, their revenue, the profitability. Are you burdened with debt, or are you debt-free? All these important questions. And then once they decide upon a model, we can put them in touch with other business owners who are currently utilizing that model, so they can talk to them and say, you've been through it before. How did it go? How is it going right now? Anything that I should know about? Those are very important, that connection, knowing that they're not going through it alone. Mm-hmm. And then we are able to put them in touch with what we call the service providers, the attorneys, and those who can help kind of get them over the finish line. And we'll check in with them, making sure that they're all going great. And then once they do convert, then we can celebrate them, and they continue to come to our events. They may join us on a webinar to talk to other people now. Now that they're a business, employee-owned business, they get to be the experts and tell the people who are thinking about it, their experiences.
I feel that this is a critical time to think about this, right? Why me as an employee? Why would I be interested in my boss, in the owner, to go through this process? How do I get that benefit as an employee?
Well, interestingly, if we're looking in the Charlotte market especially, there's been a lot of conversions of construction companies over to employee ownership. Because if you think about the construction industry, you have people who checking the wind, who's paying more this week? I think I'll go work for that firm. There's traditionally not been a lot of loyalty in certain industries. Yeah. And so realizing that this employee ownership model can bring that loyalty is great for recruiting and also for retention of the employees. Mm-hmm. Now imagine bringing in a candidate and saying, okay, here's the hourly pay and the normal benefits, but we are employee owned. And so let's do a projection. If you stay with us for 10, 15, 20 years, and at the rate we are growing right now, look what you're going to be able to leave with when you're leaving this company in however many years. It's a great retention tool.
Yeah.
But that's the financial aspects. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about the emotional aspects, right?
Yeah.
And an employee-owned company could be just an employee-owned company, but it thrives when you also bring in that ownership culture. Right. And so something called open book management, where you are sharing with the employees, here's what our budget is for the year, and going through that with them, maybe monthly, maybe more frequently. Here we are compared to our budget. How did we do last month? Hey, employees, can you think something went awry here? What happened? We need feedback, because they know that if they provide that feedback, then it's not only helping ultimately, you're trying to satisfy the customer, right? If you satisfy the customer, it's going to help the company, and it's going to help them personally also, mm-hmm. to their pocket, but also that feeling like, hey, I just made a difference.
Yeah. Is there a challenge with the cultural aspect, this transition from moving, I'm just an employee, to moving into, I'm an owner? Has there been any challenge on that implementation?
It is a challenge. And in my personal experience, it really took 2 years for everyone to really, truly understand that change. Yeah. You start teaching everybody about the numbers. Hey, here's our profit and loss statement. Here's the money that we make. Here's the money that goes out. Here's how that's going to affect what we are able to share with you at the end of the year. Yeah. A lot of education that goes on there. You get that first statement at the end of the year, the first time they share in whatever form that is, and the employees go, "Oh, okay, that's great."
Mm-hmm.
But they don't really understand it, in my experience, until that second one comes out, and in the ESOP, you're getting more and more and more shares every year, and you're seeing that growth, and that little light bulb goes off.
Yeah.
But it also has to be the managers really have to be on board with that engagement and accepting of those ideas and suggestions and innovations that can bring. It is a challenge, and you have to have the right culture to make it sing.
Who do you think is responsible for the culture implementation? Is that coming from the old management on the company? Is it coming more from the employees who are eager to learn more? Do you guys need like a third party that helps implement the changing culture?
There are certainly people out there, the two bigger ones I'll say is the Great Game of Business, or EOS, Entrepreneurship Operating System. They have ways that they can come in as an outside provider. They may gamify it, just find ways to get engagement by the employees. So those certainly exist. I would say in the worker cooperative model that there is more incumbent on the employees to get this engagement and culture. Yeah. Because they have more of that direct ownership. They may be forming committees to make some decisions. Right. Yeah. But on all forms of them, some of that depends on whether the owner is staying or not. I think I mentioned early on that you don't have to stay. And this is another benefit for employee ownership, because if someone sells their business and they have a buyer that says, "Yeah, I'll buy you," they're going to tell you, business owner, "We want you out of here because we're bringing our own people in," right? Yeah. Or they're going to say, "Oh, we're going to put you on some handcuffs on you. Yes, we'll buy you, but you have to stay for another 2 years." Right. So that decision is tied directly to that buyout. Employee ownership, that owner can make that decision, and that's decoupled. That ownership, they can sell that company to the employees now and stay within that business and continue to develop that culture, to develop that leadership. Yeah. Or if they already have that in place, they can sell and exit.
If you ask me the way I look at this as an employee, right? If I was working for a place that was going through this process, I would take this as a training opportunity too, because it opens the door for me as an employee to get more engaged, to be more on top of what is going on with the company. And why not maybe in the future use that knowledge as a tool to potentially open my own business, Yes. That's the way I look at it, but I don't know what they think about it.
And I think, people talk about workforce development overall in state agencies everywhere. This is a way to develop that workforce. You are teaching them about accounting, profit and loss statements, what is cost of goods sold, all these technical terms that you're now teaching your workforce in greater understanding of how a business is run. Yeah. They transfer that knowledge. If they end up leaving that company, they're transferring that knowledge. You've just done on-the-job training for everybody in that company.
I see this as there's never a perfect deal, right? But is potentially the closest to the best negotiation strategy, where the owner is getting the benefit of leaving that legacy, ensuring that the name and that was built is still strong and is taken by people who understand the culture of the what he built. But at the same time, as the employees, you feel this feeling of being empowered, because you're not just a wage earner anymore. You have a stake in the company, and a lot of us complain that management never listened to me. And yes, this is a great way to go about it. There's something that we talk on this podcast. We talk about neuroscience, psychology, and all that stuff. And to me, there were a few words that you mentioned, where culture was one of those, right? And retention too, right? Retention to me is that kind of ability to transmit a forward-looking vision to the employees so they stay for a brighter future. One of the challenges we constantly see is this overwhelming decision to stay in a place that offers an immediate reward compared to the long-term result, which can be higher, right? The problem is that we have this problem on taming our instinct of having immediate satisfaction, right? And we develop this bias. Do you think this is part of the challenges for an employee that, there's people that they show up just for the salary, right? And you were mentioning too that they go to wherever they are offering a little bit more. And is this feeling of, okay, I'm going to get more money right now instead of thinking about my retirement, thinking about my bank account by the end of my career. Do you think this is applicable to this? How would you explain that?
Yeah. Interesting you brought that up because that is a particular challenge for the ESOPs because that is a retirement vehicle. The other two models are not. Those are current year profit sharing. And so you are right that in an ESOP, you do have the additional challenge for, let's just say you have a 25-year-old, coming and interviewing and you're telling them that by coming here, you're going to have this great retirement. And they're like, well, that's great, but I want to buy a house, But there's more to, I think this current generation, I'll back up, this current generation is also showing is needs and wants that engagement. So it's more than just the paycheck. But also if you look at the statistics for employee-owned companies, they actually do have better wages and better benefits than companies that are not employee-owned in that same industry. Overall, the wages are 33% higher, and it doesn't matter whether you are a manager or, again, you're stocking shelves. The benefits accrue across the broad spectrum because you are sharing against all levels. And so overall, that young employee is likely to have better benefits compared to a similar company in the same industry.
Yeah.
Just by being employee-owned.
33% higher. That's a significant increase.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Wow. And we were talking also about the time that we are experiencing when a lot of owners are retiring and then they don't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
So it seems that this is a great opportunity for that transition. Do you know how I think about numbers a lot, right? And why would I be interested in going in this direction? What are my options? And we were doing an analogy on real estate a few minutes back that right now prices are going down. There is a lot of inventory right now. It's not like in the pandemic that inventory was very reduced and the owners or the sellers were able to set huge prices for their properties. How do we take this into the retirement landscape that we are seeing with business owners?
Sure. As the baby boomers are all aging to the retirement point. And so if you look, more than half of the business owners in the United States of private businesses are of 55 years of age and older. So you have a big wave. We're calling it the silver tsunami, as this wave of the business owners are getting to that point where they have to make that decision of what am I going to do with my business? Who's going to take on the ownership of this legacy that I have built?
Yeah. It's very interesting, all this. I'm just like thinking about like so many things at the same time. But another question I had when you were talking about all these details, right? Because it seems as an employee, I would personally push for that, right? Like I would be like, come on, guys, let's do it. Mm-hmm. Have you faced any circumstance where the employees actually want to implement this, but the owner is against that idea?
Yeah. Looking at the three models, it's very possible for the ESOP and the EOT, for the business owner to make that decision, not say a word to the employees, and then have a big town hall, pull all the employees together and say, congratulations, you're now employee owners. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand why they might want to do that because it is very complex. There's a lot of details to iron out. You don't want to get everyone's hopes up and say, hey, this might happen, and then something falls apart, So I see the psychological aspects of that you want to say, we want to make sure that we can say this, that it is actually happening before you make that announcement.
Yeah.
Right. You can't do that with a worker cooperative, because the worker cooperative, as I sort of hinted, was that you have to create that company, and the new worker employees or employee owners will make decisions about the new governance structure. So they have to have that buy-in before it ever happens. So yes, I have seen those instances where the employees do want to make this worker cooperative happen, and they have to convince the business owner that this is a good way to go.
Yeah.
Let's talk about pricing for a second.
Yeah.
So for all three of these models, one of the first things you'll do, first of all, is we call a feasibility study.
Mm-hmm.
Is the company ready to convert over? Do they have the leadership in place? Do they have operations? Is all that knowledge that was in the owner's brain, does someone else know about it? If he were to leave, would this place fall apart?
Yeah.
Oh, you need this for anything, not just employee ownership, but really for most sales to have that done. But the second thing is evaluation. You're going to have an independent party say, this company, here's the market value, just like an appraisal on a house. You have come in, you look at the numbers, you look at the equipment, you kick the tires a little bit, and see what this company's worth on the market, who would pay for this. And that is the price that you're selling your business, right? So it's not giving it away to your employees. They're getting value for the legacy that they built.
I think that's very important, because of course, if I was the owner, I want to sell it for the highest price possible, right? There is something, and I don't want to get too technical, but some companies are also priced depending on the culture and that intrinsic value, that added value that they have, right? And it has a monetary impact too. And I think it's good that we are talking about this, because I feel from an business owner's perspective, making sure that the company is functioning in every single aspect, including the cultural aspect, is going to add value, right? It's gonna play into for how much you can sell your company at the end, when you're about to retire.
Yeah. And if you're a business owner who's listening to this right now and you're not yet ready to retire, right? But you've got a timeline, 3-5 years. If you start implementing some of those practices right now, you can start bringing that ownership culture feel to the employees, to the business right now. Get that information out of your brain, get that leadership in place, so that when it is time and you're ready to exit, you and your employees and the leadership is in place to take this over and just shine.
How long do you think that the whole process takes, since the preparation all the way to the completion of this vehicle?
Yeah. If everything is in place, so this business owner has the leadership in place, everything is ready, and he or she has set the company up for success. Once a decision is made for both of the ESOP and the EOTs, 6 months to 12 months is that process to make this whole thing happen.
Okay.
Worker cooperatives are going to be longer. That's going to be, I think, on average, 18 months to get a worker cooperative converted over. And that is because, unlike the other two models where you can make it happen and you tell the employees, worker cooperative, you're bringing in those employees and they're making some of the decisions before that whole transaction happens. So there's a lot more upfront work.
Yeah. A lot of people are conflict averse, right?
Yes.
If I was going through a process and I'm like, oh my God, now I'm part of the company, how am I going to deal with the disagreements with my coworkers that are now owners too? How do you overcome this friction? Because I'm assuming there's new tensions created when everybody has a stake in the company. How do you handle that?
Yeah, let's just be clear that even in a worker cooperative where you have employee owners who have one share, equal shares in that business, that doesn't mean that you can't fire an employee owner. If you are not doing your job, even though you are an owner, you can still be fired.
Mm-hmm.
So we make that clear. Yes, it has to be managed. This culture, just with anything, of you want that input. You also can't let that just go wild. Right. So it's just understanding the mechanism for the input. You still have regular structures with the supervisors. There's ways to still have that input without having things run amok.
I see. And I I'm also thinking, we've been talking a lot about negotiation skills lately in this podcast. And one of the aspects is, well, the first thing we talk about is active listening, right? Like pay attention to the needs of the counterparty, right? That's going to help a lot in finding a middle ground. But also is this mentality of expanding the benefits for everybody, right? I think we have a misconception, at least with a lot of people that I used to talk to in the past, that negotiation is all about getting everything for myself and trying to take the biggest slice of the pie or the cake. But this is another vehicle, right? This is a way to expand the benefits for everybody. And when we talk about any of these three ways of employee ownership, what hits my brain is this is a great way to expand the pie, to make it bigger, a different alternative to the traditional like M&A or any of the private equity options that we have there. Let me ask you something a little bit maybe more personal. How was this transition? Because you work for private equity.
Yes.
How was this transition from private equity, which has maybe a different mindset, right, to this employee ownership vehicles? Was it easy for you to kind of change that chip mentality?
I did it in reverse. I was with an employee ownership company and then ended up as private equity.
Yeah.
It was not easy. I stuck with it for 2 years in private equity and said, this is just not for me.
Why was that? Was it was like very harsh?
The ownership was held in Chicago, right? And this company was in the middle of the state in New York State. And so there's also that perception by the people in Chicago that, oh, you're what they considered, although it wasn't rural New York. You don't know anything. Our opinions didn't count, even if we had good opinions. They didn't pay attention to them. And so it was, and knowing also, going from employee ownership, knowing that your efforts are really going back to Chicago to fuel paying back their investors and then maybe making the next acquisition.
Yeah. I don't want to disclose a lot about what I do or what I used to do. But I remember going through the office and seeing, they post events, they post a lot of things about the culture. And something that was standing out to me was this poster that says, focus on investors, focused on clients. And I was like, where are we in this picture?
Yes, exactly.
Like we are working here a lot.
A lot. Yeah.
And I think what we are producing is also important. But when I read focusing clients, I'm not your client. I support your business, right? Yeah. Where are we? And I think we are far away from utopia, right? Like there is no perfect world. But I personally think this is very satisfactory. This is a good way to bring, as you described, this is not communism or this is nothing close to that. But I think it's a good way to encourage employees to have this engagement, this sense of ownership, this empowering them to. What is what you would say you would love the most about what you guys do
at NCEOC?
Yeah. If you think about the word satisfaction, what do you think about?
For me, when I'm speaking to those business owners, it's seeing that light bulb moment when there's that fear and uncertainty for that business owner of what am I going to do? They're concerned about their legacy and their employees. And then when you give them this option and seeing the eyes light up and say, oh, I didn't even know this was possible.
Yeah.
For me, that's the best part of my job. That aha moment, I call it.
Yeah.
We're talking about employees and we're talking about the business owners. I want to bring in also the benefit to the community. Because as a business is looking, what's the future of this business? And the options of selling it to out of state, whether that's private equity or some other company, versus the ownership staying local. A locally owned employee has 3 times a 3x return to the community for that business, because the profits, rather than being sent back to headquarters unknown, the profits stay within that community. The employees now have that money in their pocket to go spend it at those businesses that are within their community. So now you have profitability for those other business owners. And it's just a cycle of, recycling and expanding the profitability within that community rather than seeing those profits go somewhere else.
Expansion is I like that word. I like it. With the current economic landscape globally, right? Like we live in this unified economy where transactions, international transactions take place at a huge speed. But at the same time, I feel that people started realizing that supporting local economy brings a lot of health, right?
Yes.
To everybody. Do you think that we are moving in that direction, this shop local kind of theme?
Certainly do seem to see more of that.
Yeah.
Those thematic, shop local. But at the same time, aren't you seeing more and more Amazon and such boxes being delivered to your neighbor's front steps?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know overall to tell you what direction we're moving.
Yeah. What do you think? I think I know the answer, but I can ask. What do you think is the best way to go about it?
If you have that local business that has that excellent customer service, accessibility, if you have that option with me as a consumer, yes, it's easy to sit down on the couch and order something online and have it, delivered to your door. But if we can make it an experience, and it's not just the shopping, but you just mentioned earlier this place where it's all in one. You go have your dinner, go take care of your shopping, all in one. It becomes that experience. We need more of that. We need people to get off of the couches. Anyway, we talk about loneliness. That this generation is one of the loneliest generations of the young people, especially after the pandemic. We've gotten used to sitting on our couches and getting things delivered, and that does lead to that loneliness. So what's the best way, I think? Yeah. Let's all acknowledge that, and let's get outside.
Exactly. And I really like that answer. Because we were not talking about what is the best way just in monetary terms, right? But I like that you incorporated the social aspect, right? What brings the best of multiple angles, multiple dimensions, right? And you touch on this social and psychological aspect. And I feel one of the reasons why some businesses are that successful is because they are able to create community.
Yes.
And I think a lot of topics around those evolve around community, the people that how you interact with each other, right? And this type of employee ownership starts with that, right? Building that kind of community and that community supporting common goal that is the health of the business. And I like also what you mentioned about it not stops at the company. It expands around where the company is existing, right? The community,
yes,
the town, the state, and it has so many multiple layers that I personally like it a lot. I'm sure a lot of people would be like, no, like I'm all for globalization and let's keep buying from Temu and all these places, because let's be realistic, prices are important, and right now everything is going up, right? But and I come back again to this perspective of not being like short-sighted and think about the future, right? Like it may be painful. Yes, I agree. I don't like paying a lot of money at the gas pump, right? But at the same time, with this oil situation, I feel that once this is over, it's going to bring a lot of stability in the long term. I think this is temporarily painful, and we all hate that we are going through this. But maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think it's gonna it's gonna stabilize at some point, right? What is that stability point for the companies that go through this process? When do you think? When do you guys see that this turbulence? Because I think it's not like an easy process. When this turbulence is over, after 2-3 years.
I think certainly the employees really start to see the light. And of course, you can always help with that cultural engagement for them. So some of that's going to depend on how much you're willing to invest in the employees and bring in that cultural engagement. But that's layered, the cultural and then the financial benefits. So between those two, If you get that cultural engagement, that can come pretty quickly. And then that long-term realization might take that 2-3 years. Now, we mentioned at the beginning that these transactions are done through loans, right? So the first 5-7 years, you might have a loan that's a 5 or 7 year loan to make this transaction happen. You won't have as much money as a company because you're paying back those loans. But now imagine, let's just say it's a 7-year loan, paid off that original loan for the business, and now you're generating even more cash. And so there is a little bit with this initial transaction, there is a little bit of patience that has to happen, an acknowledgement that, yes, it's ours. We're still paying off those loans, but let's look to the future, because as soon as these loans are paid off, that profitability increases that much more.
Yeah. It's that long-term view, right?
It's hard.
We got to be patient.
Yeah. Not much of that going around.
That's true. Do you think that's also a challenge? Like,
Yes.
Do you consider yourself as a patient person? Yeah.
Yeah, I try to be. Yep.
How do you enforce that? Well, no, you don't enforce patience. Yeah, that's stupid. You don't enforce patience. How do you put in practice that? Why do you consider yourself patient? What is that characteristic that you see in yourself that you say, oh, I'm more patient than most of the people?
I think it takes time. Maybe my husband will disagree, but I don't think I've been, I don't think I was ever a really impatient person, but I think I've become more patient. With age comes wisdom. And, as you come through, you start to see some of the same conflicts, the same situations. You've seen them resolve in the positive sense in the past. And so when you see that exact same thing come up again, you have just that much more patience to say, I've seen this before, and I know it can have a good outcome.
Yeah. And I think that's very coherent with what you are doing, because, and the reason why I was asking this, right? Because I'm like, wow, like this can take a long time, right? And it doesn't sound like a very straightforward process. Of course, you guys deliver the necessary support, right? And I think that's essential. It's crucial for this process. But at the same time, I was thinking I'm assuming they are like very patient, because and having that forward-looking vision is not easy, especially nowadays. But I think it's totally worth it. I do.
And talk about patience. We just had, there was a company that just converted over to an ESOP back in December, Raleigh-based business. A little shout out to IQ Contracting. And we look back in our records, and the first time they came with questions about an ESOP was year 2000.
Wow.
So that's a long patience, right? Yeah. So we know that we are just planting the seed, that little kernel, hopefully in everyone's consciousness. And it might not be ready for them right now.
Yeah.
But as we're educating and we're trying to expand that knowledge, hopefully now that is just kind of in the back of someone's brain, knowing that this is an option for me.
This is a great message to younger generations too. What I've seen, and I have an episode of why people invest in, for example, Bitcoin and these digital assets, right? Which a lot of young people do it.
Yeah.
And it's okay, right? Like their tolerance to risk is way higher. They are younger. They can make more mistakes. Not necessarily mistakes, because a lot of people made a lot of money.
Yeah.
But they can take on these huge risks, right? Even though a lot of us don't understand exactly what's behind the crypto assets. But there is a number that it's published every year where they ask people first. It's like a survey, and they ask, how much do you want in your bank account for you to consider yourself wealthy?
Yes.
Right. I just hate that survey because it puts a lot of pressure on people, right? On people my age, which I'm not gonna say, but people my age, it adds a stress in the sense like, we think like I'm not even close to that number, right?
Yes.
What do I do now? Like I just have a shorter time to make up like all the money I didn't invest in the past, or all the money I spent in traveling or any other stuff. But at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on young people, and they start taking these asymmetric risks, investing in things that they don't understand. This episode to me is a valuable lesson about you gotta be patient, be forward looking, and expand your horizon, is expand your vision. Like there are so many different options, and understand the risks behind. And for the older generation, people retiring, this is very valuable too because is you never stop learning, right? Had no idea this type of employee ownership exists, and it just came to my attention a few months ago, and I'm still fascinated by this topic. And I really encourage business owners, and I have a lot of friends from Latin America. I'm sure, at least I haven't heard a lot of this in some of the events that I go to. But the thing is people really need to consider this, right? And it doesn't have to be if they are retiring, right? Because the planning phase can take a long time. I'm even considering with this company start doing something like that in the next years.
You can come talk to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you are right that there are other reasons other than retirement. So certainly a business owner who has a great viable business can sell a portion of the business. You don't have to sell all of it at once. Mm-hmm. You can do a portion of this business, take the proceeds, and reinvest it into another company. So we'll call it a serial entrepreneur. Well, that's one way to fund that next investment. Or we all know that a business owner, all of their eggs are in one basket, all of their assets. And so they can also sell a portion of that company, give it back, give that ownership to the employees, and then they can diversify, take those funds. And now, as you just said earlier on, that people are taking risks, they can mitigate that risk. They can reinvest those funds elsewhere. Lots of reasons, many of stories I can tell you of why people made that decision. There's one company that had two brothers that owned the business, 4 kids. So this is actually was the 3rd generation of the business. 2 kids are involved, 2 kids are not. Mm-hmm. So those 2 brothers said, what happens if something happens to us? You're going to have 4 kids now who may inherit equally in this business. 2 may want to sell it and 2 may not. So they were able to sell the business to the employees as an ESOP. That ownership continues and there's no fighting between those siblings or cousins. The 2 who want to be in the business still can stay in the business. I'm sure you can get some bonuses in there for performance, right? But then the other 2, those 2 brothers now can distribute their assets in their wills however they want at that point. And then you don't have that potential breakup of the business. I could give you lots of examples of why. It's not always retirement.
Yeah, that was a great one. Diversification, right? Diversified investments. I didn't think about it, but yeah, that's a great way for a business owner to diversify their initial investment, which is the business itself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, and I would love to have and talk about those myths, the myth busters. Yeah, because I think this is great as an introduction, right? Because even to me, it's a brand new concept, and I'm still learning a lot about that, and I'm sure a lot of people would be interested, right? And of course, the more interest you have, the more questions, and
yes,
and I'm sure we're gonna get to the myth buster session soon. How's everything looking for you guys? Have you been growing a lot? Are you busier than normal lately?
We are definitely busier than normal lately, which is all a wonderful thing to have.
How many companies per year do you guys help?
So let me back up a little bit. So I told you about my past experiences with the ESOP and the private equity firm. I started with the North Carolina Employee Ownership Center just over a year ago. Mm-hmm. So I'll talk about my experiences, right? Mm-hmm. So, but in that 1 year, I've seen just in the last, I would say 3 months, this really uptick in interest. And I think one of the things, let's talk about advisors for a moment. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult for me to go to a business owner and just talk for them, selling the business, the retirement, it's like talking to someone about their will. That's a very sensitive topic, right? I can't go into a business owner and say, trust me, you don't know who I am, but trust me, I can give you good advice, right? And so what's been really important in this last year for me has been to focus on those advisors, the CPAs, the exit planners, the attorneys, those people who are the trusted advisors for the business owners, SBTDC locally, those governmental business advisors. They're the ones who are the first to hear from the business owner saying, I'm thinking about, retirement, or how do I deal with this and that? And so most of our connections lately have been referrals from those advisors when they realize benefits to the business owner.
To me, the word of mouth is kind of the best or the most efficient, long-lasting type of marketing. Because that's basically, it's more powerful than a Google review.
Yes.
Because nowadays we live in a society where everything is online. Like, you read the commentaries, you read the Google reviews. But when it comes to employee ownership, if an owner is talking to you and telling you, like, there is this, I went through this, and this is the result, I think that says a lot. So having that word of mouth and that recommendation from other business owners that you guys helped, I think it's a great legacy that you guys are building.
It is that community. We call it the employee ownership family or the community. And we welcome, whenever there's a conversion over, we welcome them into that community and into that family and support each other. We're going to have a conference in September, and that is a great vehicle and opportunity to bring those employee-owned businesses together, to swap stories, to share best practices, because you can learn from those who've been through it before.
I have one more question about the businesses that you guys are helping, because you mentioned construction is one of the leads on this
Correct
adoption. There's a lot of Latin American owned businesses in construction. How do you guys interact with the Latin American community?
Yeah, we are finding ways to kind of get our foot in the door and make those connections and build that trust. Again, it's all about trust.
Yeah.
So me walking in again, I need to have that trust. Here locally, we have Prospera, who helps business owners, and we are able to have that connection. We are actually going to be doing a webinar series in Spanish specifically. So that'll be hopefully done by the fall, so that we can connect and make it easier, more accessible to understand, and the nuances.
Yeah. I think that's going to be very important, because the Latin American community is the fastest growing in the state.
Yes.
And the contribution to the economy is very, very important. I don't have my numbers right now, but it's important, the contribution that is made. And I don't remember if I shared this story in the past, but I had to take down some trees in my property, and taking trees down is not cheap.
It is not. I'll speak from experience on that one also.
We finally decided to pay. It was that expensive that I even thought, like, well, maybe I can just climb and start taking it down. But again, like, I didn't want to take that asymmetric risk.
Yeah.
We decided to hire a company owned by a guy from Central America, and I was very innocent when I asked him, like, you have new equipment, and he showed up with, I think, 3 trucks and heavy machinery to take down the trees. I asked him, how do you mind me asking, like, what's the interest rate you're paying? And he told me, like, no, I'm not paying interest rate. I bought everything in cash. And I was like, wow, that seems to be like a lot of money, right? From there, I learned 2 important lessons. One, the amount of money in a lot of industries where the Latin American community is involved, it's a lot. There's a lot of money behind. But at the same time, that taught me that there's a lot of education needed in the community. Because to me, it wasn't potentially the best decision to pay everything up front and end up with 0 capital in your pocket, right? And that was one of the experiences for me to kind of start this journey on portraying educational content that help people make better decisions, right? And I think this is again a great learning tool, right? And this is new to me, and I'm sure it's going to be new to a lot of people from Latin America. And I would love to have something like this in Spanish. When you guys start your webinars in Spanish, I would love to be present, and I'm more than happy to advertise it with the Latin American community, because I think this is pure gold.
We'd love to have you along for the ride. Yes.
Awesome.
Great.
Illa, this has been a great conversation, and there is a lot. Is there anything that we missed talking about? Something that you consider is important to highlight during the process of adopting any of these three?
I think the one other area that I'd like to have is just to speak to those trusted advisors. I said we rely on them a lot for those referrals. And as I think about it, you think about a CPA, right, who's helping out a business owner. It is their duty. They are there to help minimize taxes. They're trying to find every penny that they can give to the owners, right? But when it comes to that owner's decision to sell that company, to remember that it's not all about finding that every last little penny for that business owner. Here they have to put their little counselor hat on a little bit and understand that there's more motivations in thinking about the legacy for that business owner than just the financial. And so understanding that the business owner's legacy, the employees, the community are just as important assets as the financial one is really important to keep in mind for those advisors.
I would love to just add on that, because in this podcast, we talk also about life purpose and more philosophical topics. We defined life purpose as that action that someone loves doing, but at the same time brings something positive to others.
Yes.
And that's, as you said, it's not all about the money, right? It's not all about how much I can take. It's also like, how much can I provide to others? Now, here we also believe that when we ask that question, when we ask, what can we bring to the table? What can we put up front for the community to take? I think that has an automatic response of abundance for everybody. And more comes our way, more comes in the way of the community. And we, as someone told me once, the sun shines for everybody. So I do believe in that. I gave you my definition of life purpose, but how do you think about that?
I would agree with your assessment that it is more than the money. It is you've built this family, and you're taking care of that family, whether that is just your company or the community as a whole. And so, as you move on to your next phase of life, don't you want to make sure that, just like with your kids, you've gone to their soccer games, you've mediated the sibling fights, you've hopefully been in a job where you've also throughout the years been able to be promoted and go to a job that you enjoyed. Same thing with this family. You've put in that hard work with them. You've mediated everything. You've grown with them. You've let them grow. And now it's time to let go, right? Our job as parents is to grow these kids so that they can become independent and let go. Yeah. What satisfaction is to see that adult child. I have 3 of them. And see that they've become caring, compassionate, successful adults. And you think about that in the same way with that company, that you've built this company. At some point, it's time to let go, and you can see this company, your family, grow on their own.
Let go is to evolve, I think. How would you like to be remembered? Like what would you like people to say when they think about you?
What I'd like is to be remembered that I was there to lift others up.
I like that. To lift others up. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
This has been a great conversation, Illa. I really,
thank you.
Really enjoyed this, and I think it ended on a very personal note, But I think what you guys are doing, it requires a lot of heart and a lot of passion. And I admire, first of all, I admire nonprofits, right? Nonprofits done well, it's a different level. And I think you guys are on that league. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing for the community.
Thank you very much. It's been a lot to unpack here, but it's been quite enjoyable. Thank you.
And I'm sure we will see each other in
Yes.
either here or through the radio show that we have. And I would be more than happy to go into the events you guys have. Do you have any events, by the way? Do you have any other events coming up?
So I mentioned that September
Mhm.
conference, September 14th, we will have that conference available for existing employee-owned companies, for those who are curious about learning more. So that's going to be the main one. I'll give a plug for our website. It's NCEOC.org. So we will list our events there. We have ongoing webinars, educational webinars. We're holding some, we'll come ESOP socials, where we're bringing together those existing ESOPs, and then any business owner who wants to learn more has a place to be in one community and support each other and ask questions from each other. So, coming to different cities near you, those events kind of like that happen. And we continue to have educational events for those advisors, specifically for those advisors, talking to them, about how they can become better advisors to their clients.
Right. I love that. Thank you so much, Illa.
Thank you.
Any shout out to close this episode?
Thank you. Appreciate your inquiring mind.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious always. Thank you so much, Illa Burbank. And thank you guys for staying here with us on another episode of Tao Podcast. And we'll see you next time.